There are moments in life when a person must choose between their own freedom and the souls they brought into the world. Most of us will never face such a decision. But Sally Crane faced it not once, but 3 times. The year was 1853. Along the Tombigbee River in western Alabama, a woman stood at the edge of a dense forest, her feet bleeding, her dress torn from days of running. Behind her lay the promise of liberation, Canada, the North, a life where she would answer to no master. Before her, back through those dark woods, back past the men with dogs and guns, lay something more precious than her own breath, her children. She had run for 3 days and 3 nights, moving on instinct and terror. Now, at the border of Tennessee, a freedman in a ragged settlement had given her bread and a whispered direction. "Go northeast toward Nashville," he said. "Find the church with the red door. Tell them Josiah sent you." The path to freedom was right there, tangible for the first time. But as she looked north, all she could see were their faces. Louisa, her firstborn, already carrying the weight of the world at 11. Beatrice, with eyes that noticed everything. Young Thomas, who still believed in stories. And little Marcus, whose small hand fit perfectly in hers. The love she felt was a physical ache, a chain that reached back over every mile she had traveled. Sally Crane turned her back on the north and began walking south. Her choice defied all logic of survival, all instinct of self-preservation. But in the economy of a mother's heart, there was no calculation, only necessity. She was returning to the very place she had risked everything to flee, drawn by a force stronger than fear. The journey back was a silent funeral for her own future, each step a burial of the free woman she might have been, walking willingly back into the prison of her past. To understand this impossible choice, we must first understand the world that forged it. The Thornton plantation was a world of ordered cruelty, 300 acres of cotton where human beings were listed alongside tools and livestock in the ledger. Robert Thornton, the master, was a man of modern efficiency who preferred his violence delegated and his accounts precise. His wife, Margaret, was a ghostly presence, her delicate constitution requiring a perfectly managed household. That management fell entirely to Sally, a woman whose very existence was a testament to the plantation's hidden sins. Sally had been born on the plantation in 1823, the light-skinned daughter of a field hand named Ruth and a white father whose name was never spoken. Her complexion became her destiny, sparing her the fields but trapping her in the big house. By 14, she was its undisputed manager, an enslaved woman who commanded the routines that sustained the Thorntons' comfort. Her reward was a small room off the kitchen, a gilded cage that kept her close, convenient, and completely controlled. Her value was her curse, binding her to a family that saw her as both indispensable and utterly disposable. By the age of 17, she was pregnant. No one asked questions, everyone understood the unspoken rules. The child, a daughter named Louisa, had skin like parchment and Sally's keen eyes. 3 more followed, Beatrice, Thomas, and Marcus. They were beautiful, intelligent children, and Sally loved them with a ferocity that terrified her. In slavery, love was not a comfort, it was the ultimate vulnerability, a hostage situation written in the flesh of your own heart. She taught them their letters in secret, a dangerous gift that could get them all whipped, because it was the only future she could give them, a tiny seed of knowledge they might one day use to navigate a world not meant for them to read. For years, Sally endured the quiet degradation, the constant shadow of the main house, for their sake. Her children had better food, better clothes, and were kept from the fields. But the price was her soul, paid in daily installments of silent submission. She watched them grow, and the thought that took root was not for her own escape, but for theirs. She dreamed of a life where they could be something other than property, where their minds could flourish without fear. But escaping with 4 young children was a fantasy. The dogs would catch them in hours. A new, desperate plan began to form in the darkness of her sleepless nights. She would go first. She would run alone, establish herself in the north, and then find a way, any way, to come back for them. It was a plan built on hope and madness, but it was the only one she had. What she didn't know was that in his study, Robert Thornton was making calculations of his own. Falling cotton prices and mounting debts required difficult decisions, and in his ledger of assets, for light-skinned children of ambiguous origin represented a complicated problem or a convenient solution. Their mother was too valuable to sell, but the children, they were a currency he was ready to spend. The collision came on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. Sally was outside the study door, her cleaning rags in hand, when she heard the voices. Thornton was not alone. The slick, familiar tone belonged to Thomas Sykes, a slave trader from Mobile. "The children are well-mannered and healthy," Thornton said. "The oldest 2 girls could work in a house immediately." Sally's blood turned to ice. She stood frozen, a statue of dread, as the negotiation unfolded just inches away. "My wife," Thornton trailed off, the unspoken words hanging in the air. Selling them would ease the tension his own actions had created in his home. "I can offer $300 for the lot," Sykes replied. "The youngest is too young to be worth much, but the older girl, if she's as light as you say, might fetch more in the New Orleans market. Certain houses prefer." Sally didn't hear the rest. The number echoed in her skull, 300. Her children, reduced to a price. A transaction. The trader would collect them at night in 4 weeks' time. The world narrowed to a single, screaming point, 4 weeks. She had 4 weeks until her children vanished into the bowels of the Deep South slave trade, scattered and lost forever. Panic, pure and blinding, stripped away all her careful planning. The strategic escape, the northern beacon, the slow rescue, it all crumbled. There was only now. There was only run. That very night, after the last candle was snuffed in the big house, Sally simply walked out the back door and into the woods. She took nothing but the clothes on her back and a mother's terror. This was not the planned escape. This was a raw, biological flight, a body propelled by the primal need to save its young. For 3 days, she moved like a ghost through the Alabama wilderness, a creature of moonlight and fear. She drank from streams, ate nothing, and rubbed wild onions on her legs to confuse the dogs whose baying sometimes echoed in the distance. The Underground Railroad was a constellation of vague rumors: follow the river, look for quilts, trust certain people, but she grasped at these whispers like lifelines. Every rustle in the brush was a patroller, every distant light was a search party. Her mind was a relentless loop of their faces, a prayer and a curse that pulled her north even as her heart strained south. On the 4th day, she crossed into Tennessee. The land felt different, the air itself seeming lighter. A freedman in a small settlement gave her bread and concrete direction: go to Nashville, find the church, say the password. For the first time, freedom shifted from a myth to a destination. She stood at a literal crossroads, the muddy path diverging in the dappled forest light. One way led to a future. The other led back to her past. The choice was an agony. If she continued, she might find safety, work, and a sliver of a chance to one day buy them back. But that would take years, and in those years they could be sold, moved, lost, or broken. The trader's wagon was due in just over 3 weeks. If she went back now, she would be punished, but they would still be there. They would still be hers. The logic of the ledger meant nothing. The mathematics of the heart declared only one sum: her freedom, alone, was worthless. Sally Crane turned her back on the North. She walked every painful mile back to Alabama, back to the Thornton plantation. She arrived exhausted, hollowed out, but resolved. She did not skulk or hide. She walked directly up to the main house in the deep night and knocked on the door. When Robert Thornton opened it, holding a candle that flickered across her dirt-streaked face, she did not beg for mercy for herself. She met his stunned gaze and said the only words that mattered: "I came back. Please don't sell my children." In that moment, she surrendered her body, but she claimed a terrifying power. She had proven that the deepest chain was not of iron, but of love. And Robert Thornton, a man who understood assets and leverage, looked at this woman who had chosen her prison, and saw not defeat, but a new and potent form of control. He would not sell the children tomorrow. He had discovered something far more valuable, the key to making a slave imprison herself. On the 4th day, she crossed into Tennessee. The land felt different, the air itself seeming lighter. A freedman in a small settlement gave her bread and concrete direction: go to Nashville, find the church, say the password. For the first time, freedom shifted from a myth to a destination. She stood at a literal crossroads, the muddy path diverging in the dappled forest light. One way led to a future. The other led back to her past. The choice was an agony. If she continued, she might find safety, work, and a sliver of a chance to one day buy them back. But that would take years, and in those years they could be sold, moved, lost, or broken. The trader's wagon was due in just over 3 weeks. If she went back now, she would be punished, but they would still be there. They would still be hers. The logic of the ledger meant nothing. The mathematics of the heart declared only one sum: her freedom, alone, was worthless. Sally Crane turned her back on the North. She walked every painful mile back to Alabama, back to the Thornton plantation. She arrived exhausted, hollowed out, but resolved. She did not skulk or hide. She walked directly up to the main house in the deep night and knocked on the door. When Robert Thornton opened it, holding a candle that flickered across her dirt-streaked face, she did not beg for mercy for herself. She met his stunned gaze and said the only words that mattered: "I came back. Please don't sell my children." In that moment, she surrendered her body, but she claimed a terrifying power. She had proven that the deepest chain was not of iron, but of love. And Robert Thornton, a man who understood assets and leverage, looked at this woman who had chosen her prison, and saw not defeat, but a new and potent form of control. He would not sell the children tomorrow. He had discovered something far more valuable, the key to making a slave imprison herself. This changed everything. Running alone meant choosing between freedom and her children at another distant crossroads. Trusting the shepherd meant walking a far more dangerous path, one that looped back into the lion's den. But it was a path that promised a chance, however slim, to keep her family whole. Sally made her choice. She let her original escape date pass and watched as the slave trader from Mobile came and went in December, leaving her children, unsold, on the plantation. Their continued presence was Thornton's trap, but it was also her window. On a moonless night in late December 1853, Sally Crane executed her second escape. This was not a flight of panic, but a mission of strategy. She moved with purpose, following the remembered route, using the stolen supplies, her senses tuned to every sound. She traveled the hidden geography Benjamin had described, stopping only in the deep cover of day. The journey was a brutal testament to her will, each mile a prayer and a preparation. After 4 nights, she saw it, a farmhouse with a quilt displaying the star pattern from her cloth. The white woman who answered the door simply said, "You're expected." This began a miraculous procession of strangers, black and white, free and enslaved, who formed a chain of quiet defiance stretching north. They asked no questions, offered no names, only food, shelter, and whispered directions to the next link. Sally was passing through an invisible America, a nation of conscience operating beneath the surface of the one that held her in bondage. She crossed into Tennessee as winter tightened its grip, the cold a sharp agony. The final barrier was the Ohio River, a wide, gray expanse separating slavery from statute. A boatman pulled her across in silence. On the northern bank lay the settlement of New Richmond, and there, in a modest church among other hollow-eyed fugitives, Sally finally met the legend. The shepherd was a woman of calm intensity, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes holding the weight of countless harrowing journeys. "You made good time," she said, as if Sally had arrived for a planned appointment. But the real work, the shepherd explained, was only beginning. The mission to go back would be the most dangerous thing Sally had ever attempted, and it would require a patience that felt like torture. They would have to wait for spring. The settlement of New Richmond, Ohio, was a revelation. To Sally, who had known only the strict hierarchy of the plantation, it seemed a miraculous disorder. Freedmen, runaways, and white abolitionists lived and worked side by side in a bustling community built on the riverbank. The air itself felt different, crisp with freedom and collective purpose. In the modest church that served as the network's heart, Sally stood among a dozen other fugitives, all wearing the same stunned expression, as if they had walked through a wall into a dream. Then the shepherd approached, and the legend became a woman, tired, focused, and devoid of any sentimentality. "You're Sally," the woman said, not as a question but a confirmation. She assessed Sally with a glance that missed nothing, the wear in her clothes, the tension in her posture, the desperate hope in her eyes. "You made good time. Faster than I expected." She gestured to a bench. "Sit. You look exhausted." But Sally could not sit. The words tumbled out, fueled by months of pent-up urgency. "I need to go back. My children, Benjamin said you could help." The shepherd nodded slowly, as if she had heard this plea 100 times before, which she had. "I know what Benjamin said. But you're not going anywhere right now." The shepherd's first lesson was patience, a cruelty in itself. She laid out the brutal mathematics of a return mission. Winter was the enemy, short days, bitter cold, and heightened suspicion, as slave catchers knew the bare forests made runaways easier to spot. A journey south now would be suicide. "If you attempt it in January," the shepherd said, her voice low and firm, "you will be caught. If you wait for spring, you will have a chance. Not a guarantee. A chance." Sally felt a scream building in her chest. Spring was months away. Every day was a lifetime in which Thornton could change his mind, sell the children, or break them. But the shepherd's gaze allowed no argument. This was not a negotiation, it was a veteran's strategy for survival. The 3 months that followed were a strange purgatory. Sally was free. For the first time in her life, she could walk where she wished, speak her mind, and earn wages for her labor. The community welcomed her, offering work in homes and workshops. It was a kindness that felt like a betrayal. How could she mend clothes or bake bread in safety while her children remained in that house of quiet terror? Her freedom was a hollow shell, an empty room where the ghosts of Louisa, Beatrice, Thomas, and Marcus haunted every quiet moment. She saved every penny, her hoard of coins a tangible promise for the journey to come. The shepherd, meanwhile, became her tutor in a different kind of warfare. This was not about fleeing, but about infiltrating. Sally learned to forge the demeanor of a hired-out slave, a different bearing than a fugitive, with subtle codes of speech and behavior that would pass white scrutiny. She memorized new, complex routes that zigzagged west before heading north, designed to throw off pursuers. She studied the forged papers that would become her new skin, a bill of sale and a travel pass identifying her as Mary, a domestic hired from a Georgia plantation to a family in Alabama. Her entire identity was being rewritten for a single, perilous performance. "The key is the cover," the shepherd explained one evening, tracing a map with a calloused finger. "You don't just snatch them and run. You arrive, you work, you become invisible in plain sight. You let them see Mary until they stop seeing her at all. Then, and only then, you move." The plan was a masterpiece of audacious misdirection. After establishing herself at a household in Grove Hill, a mere 20 miles from the Thornton place, she would retrieve the children and flee not north, but west into Mississippi, a direction no one searching for runaways would anticipate, before arcing back up through a separate network. It was a longer, harder road, but it was a road built on cunning, not just courage. As the icy grip of winter loosened, the final pieces clicked into place. The forged papers were ready, impeccably crafted. A network of contacts in Alabama and Mississippi had been alerted with coded messages. A specific date was chosen, early April, when the roads would be muddy but passable, and the rhythms of planting season would provide a background hum of activity to mask their flight. On the eve of her departure, the shepherd gave Sally a final, unflinching look. "Remember, from here on, the plan only works if everything goes right. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, one person who fails, and you'll all be captured." Sally understood. She was trading the certain agony of separation for the probable catastrophe of a failed rescue. There was no safe choice left. In early April of 1854, Sally Crane ceased to exist. In her place was Mary, a quiet, competent housemaid traveling with legitimate-looking papers. The journey south was a surreal reversal of every instinct in her body. Each mile carried her deeper back into the world of slave patrols and auction blocks, her free papers a flimsy shield against the pervasive dread. She crossed the Ohio River not with hope, but with a calculated grimness, leaving the free soil of New Richmond behind. The family in Grove Hill, the Larsons, were precisely the kind of benignly guilty northern transplants the shepherd had described. They were uncomfortable with slavery but unwilling to reject its conveniences. Mrs. Larson treated Mary with a condescending courtesy, which made her easy to deceive. Sally performed her duties flawlessly, all while using her position as an errand runner to covertly survey the area. She learned which roads were patrolled, which farmers kept aggressive dogs, and which neighbors were known for zealously hunting runaways. It was through the Larsons' own careless gossip that Sally received the most critical intelligence. Over afternoon tea, Mrs. Larson chattered to a friend about the scandal at the neighboring Thornton plantation. "That woman who ran away twice, can you imagine? Robert Thornton is still quite obsessed. He's convinced she'll try to come back for her children, though why she'd risk it, I can't fathom." The guest clucked in sympathy. "What happened to the little ones?" "Oh, they're still there," Mrs. Larson said. "Thornton won't sell them. He says they're his insurance." Sally's hands did not tremble as she refilled the porcelain cups. The children were still there. Thornton was waiting. This was both her validation and her greatest danger. He had kept the bait in the trap, confident the prey would return. For 3 weeks, Sally lived this double life, each day a tightrope walk. She was the perfect hired hand by day, and by night, a strategist staring at the ceiling, memorizing the timeline. The plan was set for the 1st of May. On the appointed evening, she gave Mrs. Larson a vague excuse about a sick relative in town, a weak story accepted by a mistress already drowsy with laudanum. Sally walked out of the Larson house carrying nothing but a small bundle of food and a knife, the persona of Mary sloughing away with every step into the dark Alabama night. She moved like a shadow through the familiar countryside, the land itself seeming to remember her. The scent of plowed earth and pine, the chorus of spring peepers, the distant glow of the Thornton plantation, it was a nightmare revisited in waking life. As she neared the property line, a profound wrongness settled in her bones. The place was too quiet. No restless hounds, no distant murmur from the quarters. It was the silence of a held breath, of a predator perfectly still. She paused at the tree-lean, every nerve screaming at her to retreat, to melt back into the woods. But then, a small figure emerged from the slave cabins and walked toward the well. It was Beatrice. The sight of her daughter, alive and so close, vaporized all caution. The mother's heart overruled the spy's mind. Sally stepped out of the shadows and into the moonlit yard, crossing the open ground toward the child who was both her destination and, she would realize too late, the perfect bait in a trap that had been set for months. The figure by the well turned, and in the faint moonlight, Sally saw her daughter's face. Beatrice had grown thinner, her eyes older, but the recognition was instant and profound. "Mama?" The word was a breath, a disbelief made sound. Yes, baby. It's me. Sally closed the distance, her hands reaching but not touching, afraid an embrace would break the spell. Where are the others? In the quarters. Sleeping. Beatrice's whisper was threaded with fear. Mama, you came back. Hush now. We don't have time. Sally's voice was low, urgent, her eyes scanning the dark silhouettes of buildings. I need you to wake them. Quiet as ghosts. Tell them to come to the well. Don't let anyone else hear. Can you do that? Beatrice nodded, a quick, sharp motion, and darted back into the shadows of the cabins. Sally stood alone by the well, the silence of the plantation pressing in on her, thick and unnatural. This was wrong. It was all wrong. The instinct that had screamed at the treeline roared again inside her. This was a stage, and she had just walked onto it. But it was too late to flee. Her children were here. 3 small shapes emerged from the darkness, moving swiftly. Louisa, tall and willowy, Thomas, all boyish angles, and little Marcus, stumbling sleepily. They converged on her, a silent hurricane of small arms and muffled sobs. Sally clutched them fiercely, her heart breaking and swelling at once. They had grown so much in the months apart. Listen to me, she whispered into their huddle, her voice a blade cutting through the night. We're leaving here. Right now. We're going to walk a very long way. You must be brave. You must be silent. No questions. No tears. Just follow me and do exactly as I say. Do you understand? For small heads nodded against her. Then let's. The lantern light exploded across the yard, blinding and harsh, pinning them in its glare. The sentence died in Sally's throat. From behind the smokehouse, William Pike stepped forward, the lantern in one hand, a heavy pistol in the other. His pale eyes held no surprise. Then came Robert Thornton, and behind him, 4 other men, neighbors, armed and grim-faced. I told you she'd come back, Thornton said, his voice rich with vindication. I told you all she'd come back for them eventually. The satisfaction in his tone was colder than the whip he carried coiled at his side. Sally pushed the children behind her, a futile gesture of protection. Her mind, so sharp with planning, went blank with the finality of the scene. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and her precious cargo made flight impossible. Evening, Sally, Pike said, almost politely. We've been expecting you. The truth, ugly and complete, settled over her. This was a trap, she said, the words flat. You knew I would come. Of course I knew, Thornton replied, taking a step closer. He was enjoying this, the slow unveiling of his mastery. We've had men watching every night for weeks. The question was never if, but when. He gestured toward Beatrice, who was shaking beside Louisa. The child at the well. I told Beatrice to go to the well at midnight. I told her if she did, she'd get extra food tomorrow. I suspected you were nearby, watching. Children are such useful bait, don't you find? The cruelty of it was so precise it stole Sally's breath. He had used her daughter's hunger, her obedience, as the hook. He had mapped her mother's heart and laid his trap along its contours. She had not outsmarted him, she had performed exactly as his understanding of human love had predicted. What now? Sally asked, her voice hollow, all fight drained by the sheer perfection of her defeat. Now we have choices to make, Thornton said, clasping his hands behind his back as if discussing crop rotation. You've embarrassed me twice. You've cost me time and reputation. The other planters whisper that I can't control my own property. That ends tonight. He nodded to Pike, who produced a length of coarse rope. You'll be bound. Held until morning. Then the whole county will witness what happens to slaves who run. It will be educational. And permanent. He paused, letting the image of the whipping post hang in the air. As for your children, Sally's hand shot out, a beseeching gesture. Don't. Please. I'll do anything. Just don't hurt them. I wasn't planning to hurt them, Thornton corrected, as if offended by the crudity. I was planning to sell them. All 4. To different buyers, as far apart as I can manage. By this time next week, one will be in Texas, one in Florida, another in the Carolinas, the last in Mississippi. You will never see them again, or know their fate. That seems a fitting punishment for your defiance. It was in this moment, cornered and broken, that the final, most profound shift occurred within Sally Crane. The calculus of the previous escapes, freedom versus family, was now obsolete. A new equation presented itself, one with even more terrible variables. He was offering her a choice between her own brutal punishment and the utter annihilation of her children's future. But he had made one error. He believed her only moves were fight or submission. He did not anticipate negotiation. I have a different proposal, Sally said, and her voice found a strange, steady calm. Thornton chuckled, a dry sound. You're in no position to negotiate. Let them go, she continued, ignoring him. Let my children walk out of here tonight. Give them safe passage north. The men around Thornton snorted in disbelief. In exchange, Sally said, her gaze locking with his, I stay. I submit to whatever punishment you want. I will never run again. I will work every day for the rest of my life without complaint. I will be your most obedient slave. But my children go free. The laughter died. Thornton studied her, his head tilted. Let me understand. You offer to give up any chance of freedom, submit to severe punishment, and labor here until you die, if I release 4 valuable pieces of my property that I can sell for a substantial profit. Why would I possibly agree to that? Because, Sally said, the words clear and measured, keeping me here under those terms is worth more than selling them. She saw a flicker in his eye. She was speaking his language now, the language of value and perception. Think of the story. A slave who would trade her freedom for her children's. Who would choose slavery over liberty, not out of weakness, but out of maternal devotion. That's a powerful story for you to tell. It proves slaves prefer the security of our care to the chaos of freedom. That's propaganda worth more than any price the children would fetch. The yard was utterly silent. The armed men glanced at Thornton, uncertain. He was turning the idea over, examining its facets. Sally pressed her slim advantage, her voice dropping. And if you refuse, then you'll have to explain tomorrow why you needed 6 armed men to capture 1 unarmed woman and 4 children. You'll have to explain how your security was so poor I escaped twice and walked back onto your land a 3rd time. The embarrassment you mentioned, it will only grow. She was bargaining with the only currency she had left, his pride and his public image. Thornton was silent for a long minute, the only sound the ragged breathing of the frightened children. I won't sell them, he said finally. But I won't free them either. He had found a middle ground that served his interests perfectly. They will be bound out. Hired labor to different plantations nearby, with contracts that bring them back here every year. They will be separated, but alive and accounted for. And you, he looked at Sally, you will remain here under strict supervision. You will be my living example. Proof of the bonds that tie a faithful servant to a benevolent master. It was not freedom. It was a life in fragments. But it was life. And it was a thread of possibility where before there was only a dead end. I agree, Sally said. The whipping took place at dawn, as promised, before an assembled crowd of slaves from 3 plantations. Thornton made it a theater of moral instruction. Sally was tied to the post, her back bared. She had told her children not to watch, but they were lined up in the front, forced witnesses. William Pike delivered 20 lashes with a methodical, dispassionate rhythm. Sally made no sound. She bit down on the leather strap until her jaw ached, her eyes fixed on a distant tree, her mind a vault containing the faces of her children. Each crack of the whip was a message to the crowd, but to her, it was the price, receipted in blood and scar tissue. When it was over, when she sagged against the ropes, Thornton addressed the silent, traumatized crowd. He spoke of loyalty, of natural bonds, of how Sally's choice proved the rightness of their world. He had his propaganda. In the days that followed, the children were sent away. Louisa to a house in Grove Hill. Beatrice to a kitchen near Mobile. Thomas and Marcus to different farms. They were allowed 1 visit per year, on Christmas Day, for 1 supervised hour. Sally recovered slowly, her body healing into a map of her sacrifice. She returned to her work in the main house, a model of quiet efficiency. She never spoke of the shepherd, of Ohio, or of escape. The woman who had run 3 times now appeared utterly subdued, her fire banked to embers. But the story of what she had done, of the choice she had forced at gunpoint, did not die. It slipped into the bloodstream of the quarters, becoming a different kind of legend, not one of freedom but of a love so formidable it could bend the master's will and rewrite the rules of the game, even in defeat. The trap had snapped shut, but in the negotiations of its closing, Sally had salvaged from the wreckage a future, however fragmented, for the souls she valued more than her own. Sally lived 17 more years on the Thornton plantation. She returned to her duties in the main house, her movement slower, her back permanently etched with the ledger of her negotiation. She was the model of quietude, a living testament to Robert Thornton's calculated narrative. He would occasionally point her out to visitors as evidence of the natural devotion between a faithful servant and a caring master. Sally would keep her eyes lowered, performing the role he had purchased with her children's proximity. The fire that had driven her north 3 times was banked, but not extinguished. It burned now as a low, constant heat, warming only the memory of her choice. Her world shrank to the boundaries of the plantation, but her children's lives, though lived elsewhere, were the compass by which she navigated. Each year, the single hour on Christmas Day became her solstice. She would wait by the fence line, her heart a drum against her ribs, until she saw them walking up the road, growing taller and stranger with each passing season. The conversations were stilted, supervised, filled with the unspoken. They shared news in code, a skill she had taught them long ago. A mention of good weather meant a kind master, trouble with the harvest meant hardship. In those fleeting moments, she could see they had survived. They had not been broken. It was a meager harvest, but she clung to it. The story of what she had done did not remain confined to the Thornton property. It escaped. Among the enslaved in Clark County and beyond, the tale of the woman who ran 3 times and bargained with the master became a whispered legend. It was told in the quarters after dark, woven into spirituals, passed along with the potato seedlings. With each telling, it morphed, gaining mythical layers. Some said she had made a deal with a river spirit. Others claimed she could turn invisible at will. The facts blurred, but the core truth resonated: a mother's love could be a force so powerful it could bend the iron laws of property, if only for a moment. The Civil War arrived not with a single shot, but as a slow-rising tide of rumor and fear, then as the thunder of Sherman's march. When Union troops finally moved through Alabama, the old order crumbled like rotted wood. Robert Thornton fled inland as his slaves walked away from the fields. Emancipation was not a date in a proclamation for Sally, but the morning she woke and realized no one would stop her from walking to the fence line and beyond. Her first steps as a free woman were not north, but in a widening circle, seeking her children. The post-war years were a chaotic puzzle of scattered records and broken trails. Fragments of evidence, like shards of pottery, hint at the picture. A census record from 1870 lists of Louisa Crane, a seamstress living in Mobile with 2 children of her own. A letter in an Ohio historical archive, dated 1873, is from a Beatrice Crawford, inquiring about a freedmen's school, mentioning her mother taught her to read in a time of shadows. These slivers suggest the seeds Sally planted, literacy, resilience, had taken root in free soil. The most tantalizing fragment is a small notice in the New Richmond Clarion from 1868. It reports the arrival of an elderly freedwoman from Alabama who wished to give thanks to a certain settlement organizer for past kindnesses that spanned the war. The woman's name was not recorded, but the article notes she spoke of a long-ago journey and had 4 grown children living in the North. Was this Sally Crane, finally crossing the Ohio River not as a fugitive, but as a free woman, completing a circle begun 14 years earlier? Did she sit with the shepherd one more time, not to plan an escape, but to share the bittersweet outcome of their pact? The historical record holds its breath, offering only a compelling maybe. Sally Crane died in 1870 at the age of 47. She was buried in the small, overgrown cemetery behind the former slave quarters, her grave unmarked, one among many anonymous mounds. There is no historical plaque, no marble monument inscribed with her name. The physical site of her suffering and her stratagem was eventually plowed under for new crops, the Thornton house itself succumbing to time and neglect. To the landscape, she left no visible scar. But the absence of stone does not mean an absence of legacy. Historians who later pieced together the whispers and fragments have fiercely debated her. One camp argues she was tragically manipulated, her maternal instinct cleverly used to reinforce the very system that bound her. Thornton's propaganda worked, they say. Her story became a tool for the oppressor, a lesson in the futility of resistance. Her return was not agency, but a final, crushing defeat. Another camp hears a different echo in the tale. They argue that in a system designed to strip the enslaved of all choice, of all negotiating power, Sally Crane forced a negotiation. With her back against the ultimate wall, she did not merely submit, she haggled. She traded her body and her future not for nothing, but for the concrete terms of her children's survival. In that awful marketplace, she secured a deal. This, they contend, was a horrific form of autonomy, the autonomy to choose what you sacrifice, to define the terms of your own martyrdom. It was freedom wrought in the negative space, a silhouette shaped by what she chose to endure. The truth likely lives in the agonizing space between these views. Her story refuses the clean, satisfying arc of the triumphant fugitive. It is messier, more tragic, and more morally complex. It forces a question that makes us uncomfortable: is true agency only the power to grasp what you want, or can it also be the profound power to choose what you are willing to lose for someone else? In a world that gave her no good choices, Sally Crane chose the one that prioritized their lives over her liberty, their future over her own. That question is her true monument. It has outlasted the plantation, the grave, and the names of the masters. The story persisted in the oral histories of Alabama, passed down through generations of black families as a testament not to the glory of freedom, but to the terrifying depth of a mother's love. It is a story that understands that sometimes the most radical act is not the grand escape, but the deliberate, heartbreaking return. It complicates our heroic narratives, reminding us that resistance wears many faces. Sometimes it is a fist raised in defiance, and sometimes it is an open hand, bargaining in the dark. The Tombigbee River still flows through what was Clark County, indifferent to the dramas that once played out on its banks. But in certain quiet moments, in the stories still told there, you can almost hear the echo of a choice that defied all sense. Not the sound of running feet heading north, but the determined, heavy tread of a woman walking south, turning her back on freedom again and again, guided by a love that slavery could commodify but never extinguish. Sally Crane's legacy is not a statue, but a whisper. A whisper that asks, across the centuries, what we would sacrifice, and whether, in that sacrifice, we might find a terrible, beautiful kind of freedom all our own.